Good morning or day or whatever time of day it happens to be for you. um, Today we are going to start with chapter 4 in our textbooks, which is entitled Organization and Regulation of Body Systems. Now, um, we're starting to move up the hierarchy chain of organization that we've been looking at over the course of the last few lessons. And now we're going to move from the simple cell into tissues and even organs. And so, again, this is an increase in the level of organization that we see. And it's here that we really begin to see regulation of the entire body as opposed to just regulation of a single cell. So, what you have to realize throughout this, from this point forward, is that the human body is incredibly complex. Think about all of the communication and regulation that has to take place in order to make your body function and maintain homeostasis. All right, again, that's an important word here. And you'll see that certainly at the end of this particular chapter. So the level of organization that we're going to talk about today is the tissue level. And a tissue is simply a group of cells that have a common structure and function. All right. And there are several different types of tissues in animals and specifically in humans. But you have to realize that other organisms also have tissues, or at least multicellular organisms. Fungi have tissues, plants have tissues, but animals are the ones that we're going to concentrate on today, and specifically human beings. All right. So again, tissues are groups of cells that have a common structure and function. So by definition, a tissue is the definition of a tissue is shown here. It's a collection of cells of the same type that all perform a common function. And in human beings, there are 4 major tissue types. And we'll go through each one of them specifically over the course of the next 4 slides or so. The first is connective tissue, and its main job is to bind the body together, hold it together, and allow it different parts of the body to interact with others. The muscular tissues are designed to either move the body itself or to move things inside the body. Nervous tissue is mostly designed for communication from the central nervous system, the brain, throughout the rest of the body, telling it, receiving input and then telling it what to do. And then finally, epithelial tissue covers the body. We'll get to that and talk in more detail about that later. Now, let's start with connective tissue. The function of a connective tissue is to bind and support the various parts of the body. Now, there are a couple of different kinds of connective tissues, which we'll get to in a second, but generally speaking, all of them have specialized cells, a ground substance, and protein fibers. So there's 3 parts to a connective tissue. The ground substance is non-cellular, meaning that it's not technically alive, but it's made of the products that cells produce. So the specific cell will make this stuff, whatever it happens to be. And it can range from solid, like the material that you see in bone, right? That's calcium phosphate, which is not alive, but it's produced by bone cells. But it can also be fluid, like, for example, the plasma that you see in your blood. The ground substance and the protein fibers together make up what we call the matrix of the tissue. All right. Now, this is an example. This picture over here is an example of adipose tissue, which we generally refer to as fat. Okay, and you can see a couple of things. First, you can see an adipose cell right here, and then several different kinds of protein fibers. You got these thick ones, which are collagen, and and the thin ones, which are elastin, which give the fat flexibility. Now, Connective tissue comes in three major forms, all right? Fibrous, which is what you see on the screen to your right. And this supports your epithelial cells and internal organs. In other words, it kind of holds everything together. You've also got supportive connective tissue like cartilage and bone, which obviously is much stronger than fat and gives your body shape and form. And then finally, you've got fluid connective tissue, which it includes blood and lymph. All right, now blood, obviously, you probably all know what blood is, and we'll spend an entire chapter talking about blood. But lymph is another fluid that runs through your body, which actually does serve a number of different functions. So fibrous, supportive, and fluid connective tissues all work together to bind and support the various parts of the body. Muscle tissue is designed to allow for movement in the body, and of the body as well. It's made of muscle fibers and cells and protein fibers, which are called actin and myosin. So there's two proteins that make up your muscles. When we get to chapters 11 and 12, we'll talk about muscles specifically and how they do their job. But there are three major kinds of muscles: skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. Now, skeletal muscles on the cellular level are multinucleate, meaning that there's more than one nucleus in each of the skeletal muscle fibers. And they also, for crying out loud, sorry, they also have a striated appearance. And if you look at the picture over here, what is going on? My goodness gracious. If you look at the picture over here, you can see this. This represents three muscle fibers with several nuclei for each one. And you can see that they have a striped appearance. This is actually a photograph of this. Now, skeletal muscles are typically attached to bones, and they are voluntary, meaning that a signal has to be sent from your brain to your muscles in order for you to do something, to walk across a room, to raise your arm, to make a peace sign, whatever it happens to be. Those are voluntary actions. Now, smooth muscle is different on the cellular level because it is uninucleate, meaning there's only one nucleus per cell, and oh, come on. All right. Apparently my computer is having a stroke. I don't know what's going on here, but the smooth muscle is uninucleate and non-striated, meaning that there's only one nucleus per cell and no stripes. And you can see that in the cartoon and in the photograph here. These are involuntary muscle cells, typically found in places like the digestive tract and the kidney tubules and any place where something has to be moved through the body without thinking about it. All right. When you digest your food, you have control only over two aspects of it: eating, bringing it in, and to some degree, letting out the waste products at the end. All right. So everything in between there is involuntary. Finally, we have cardiac tissue. And cardiac tissue is uninucleate, meaning, again, one nucleus in each cell, and striated. And so you can see the striped here. But you can see that these fibers are branched as opposed to the long tubular skeletal muscle fibers. They are also involuntary and found in the heart. All right, cardiac refers to the heart. And you have no conscious control over how fast or slowly your heart beats. And so we consider it to be an involuntary tissue. The next one, the third one, is nervous tissue. And the main function of nervous tissue is to allow for communication between different parts of the body, right? Specifically between cells. And there are three parts to the function of a nervous system: sensory input, meaning you're receiving a signal from the environment, whether the environment is outside the body or even inside. Integration of data, meaning that the information is processed somehow, and then an output of some sort, whatever we do. So 3 phases to this communication. Nervous tissue is composed of cells called neurons, and neurons have 3 parts. All right, you've got the cell body, which is this thing right here in this cell, the dendrites, which are located up here, these branchy things, and then the axon, which runs all the way down here. These 3 parts of each nervous cell also go through the 3 steps that I talked about a minute ago. The dendrites take in the information, so they're responsible for input. The cell body then integrates the data and processes it, and then the axon sends a signal to the next place, wherever that happens to be. Now, lest you think that the nervous system is only composed of neurons, you should be aware that the nervous system is so important that there are a whole series of cells called neuroglia, and their function is to support and nourish the neurons. They outnumber neurons 9 to 1. So think about that. Every neuron has approximately 9 other cells that are taking care of it. And you can see them, some of them shown here on the picture. All right, the microglia over here, these guys are designed to engulf bacterial debris. So they keep the nervous system safe from pathogens, things that might want to attack your nervous system. The astrocytes that you see over here are designed to provide nutrients. And so they're taking nutrient molecules out of the bloodstream, and you can see a capillary shown down here, and they're directly feeding the neurons, so they're nourishing the neurons. And then finally, there are cells called oligodendrocytes, and you can see one right here. And this produces a covering on the axons called the myelin sheath. And the myelin sheath is designed to help insulate the axon and also to increase the speed at which a nervous signal is sent down the length of the axon. Finally, we have what we call epithelial tissues. And these are groups of cells that form a tight, continuous network. Now, what does that mean? It really, the best analogy that I can come up with is that it's almost like a blanket. It covers stuff, all right? It covers your internal organs. It lines the body cavities. It covers your body's surfaces, can be found in certain glands, and so on. Now, epithelial tissues are different from other tissues in that the 2 sides of each cell are very different. They are anchored by a basement membrane of some sort, usually made of connective tissue, to be honest, on one side, and they are free on the other side, meaning that they're exposed to the environment, whether it's external, like, for example, your skin, or internal, like the insides of your arteries and veins, some of your digestive organs. They're all lined with epithelial tissue. And epithelial tissue is named after the appearance of various cell layers and the shape of the cells. So 2 different parts to this. Okay. So how do we name epithelial tissues? All right. Well, it's almost like ordering from a Chinese menu, an old style Chinese menu. You order one thing from column A and one thing from column B, and that makes your meal. So we name them based on 2 characteristics. The first is the number of cell layers. And if an epithelial tissue is made of only 1 cell layer, we call it a simple epithelium. If it's made of multiple cell layers, then we call it a stratified epithelium. And there's a third type, which is called pseudo-stratified. The prefix pseudo in Greek means false or fake. So pseudo-stratified epithelium appears to have multiple layers, but in reality only has 1. And I'll show you some images of this in the next slide. The second aspect to naming an epithelial tissue is by the shape of the cells. And they can be either cube-shaped, meaning that each dimension of the cell is essentially the same. All right, it doesn't have to be a perfect cube, but close enough. Columnar, which are tall and thin or column-shaped, and then squamous, which are squished or flattened cells, okay? So when you go through and you name epithelial tissues, you choose a number of cell layers and a shape of the cell. So you could have, for example, simple cuboidal epithelium, simple columnar epithelium, or simple squamous epithelium. You could have stratified cuboidal or stratified squamous, and so on. All right. So you choose the number of cell layers and the shape of the cells, and that gives you the name of the specific epithelial tissue that we happen to be talking about. Now, this diagram goes through several examples of what you might see in terms of these different types of epithelial tissues. On the left, you see a simple squamous tissue. Now, a couple of things I want you to notice about this. First, we've got pictures all along here, but the most important picture in terms of definitions are on the bottom. All right, the first one is a simple squamous tissue, and you can see one cell layer thick, right, lined by the basement membrane on the bottom, and one cell layer, and the tops of the cells are exposed to whatever the environment happens to be. It's found lining the lungs, blood vessels, and its major function is to protect the system. In the second picture, we see simple cuboidal cells here. And these guys are cuboidal in shape. All right, notice they're cube-shaped, lined by the basement membrane. You can see it right here. And then the other side of the cell is exposed to the environment. In this case, this is representative of a kidney tubule. All right, and so the inside of this is filled with waste products from the kidneys running down probably to the bladder. In the third one, we have simple columnar. All right, notice how long and tall and thin these cells are. But again, they're attached to a basement membrane on the bottom and exposed to whatever the environment is on the top. All right, we find these lining the small intestine, the oviducts in females, and in the small intestine to absorb nutrients. Over here, we have what's called pseudostratified ciliated columnar. Now, the ciliated part just means that they have these little hair-like organelles, and you can see them in this area here. All right, and those increase surface area for absorption or other functions. But notice that although each of these cells is attached to the basement membrane on the bottom and exposed to the environment on the top, they all have both aspects of this. And then, but the nuclei are distributed all over the place, and the cell shape is not regular, and so therefore it kind of almost looks like it's stratified, but it's not. Finally, on the right-hand most picture, we have stratified squamous epithelium. Notice that there are multiple layers here. The basement membrane is attached to the bottommost layer, and then the topmost layer is exposed to the environment. But there's a lot of cell layers shown here. And this can be found in the lining of the nose, the mouth, the esophagus, and so on. And it is designed mostly for protection. Okay, so that concludes what we're going to talk about in the first video, the four major kinds of tissue. And in the second video, which is coming right up, we'll talk about the next level of organization. What do tissues actually come together to produce? So again, this is the first of 3 videos, and I hope you enjoyed that.